The sun rose slowly over the Mississippi Delta, not in a blaze of beauty, but in a dull, weary glow, as if even the sky was tired of witnessing what happened on the land below. Morning mist clung to the cotton fields like a low white ghost, wrapping the rows in silence. From a distance the plantation looked peaceful, grand even. The white columns of the main house stood tall, polished and proud, while the cabins of the enslaved crouched low near the tree line, crooked and half-rotting, as though ashamed to exist in the same world. But wait for a second before we continue towards the video. Let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And don't forget to subscribe. Mama Eliza was already awake when the first rooster crowed. She always was. Sleep did not come easily to her anymore, not at her age, not with her memories. She sat on the edge of her narrow wooden cot, her feet bare against the cold dirt floor, her back bent like a bow that had been pulled too many times. Her hands, gnarled, swollen at the joints, fingers permanently curved, rested in her lap. The skin was dark and dry, mapped with scars so old they had faded into her flesh like stories no one bothered to remember. Outside her cabin, the plantation began to stir. Chains clinked softly. Someone coughed. A baby cried and was quickly hushed. The sounds were familiar, almost rhythmic. Eliza had heard them every morning for longer than most people on the plantation had been alive. No one knew exactly how old Mama Eliza was. Some said 70, some said 80. Others whispered she might be closer to 90, though no one believed a slave could live that long. The master once laughed at the idea. "She's older than my grandfather," he had said, "old as the land itself." That was fine with Eliza. The older they thought she was, the less they saw her. She reached for the faded shawl hanging from a nail in the wall and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders. The fabric was thin, patched so many times it was hard to tell where the original cloth ended and the repairs began. She tied it carefully, the same way she did every morning, her movements slow and deliberate. Anyone watching would have seen only an old woman struggling with age, but no one was watching. Eliza stepped outside. The morning air was cool, damp with river breath. She paused, leaning heavily on a crooked stick she used as a cane, and looked out over the plantation. Cotton stretched in every direction, endless and white, like a field of open wounds. Beyond it, the tree line marked the beginning of the swamp, dark and tangled. That swamp had swallowed many things over the years: animals, runaway slaves, rumors, and sometimes truths no one wanted uncovered. Eliza's eyes lingered there for a moment longer than usual. Then she began to walk. Her steps were slow, painfully slow. Each one seemed to take effort. She shuffled rather than walked, dragging her feet through the dirt. The younger enslaved people passed her on their way to the fields, careful not to bump into her, some offering quiet greetings. "Mornin', Mama Eliza. Bless you, Mama." She nodded back, murmuring words that barely carried. Her voice had grown soft with age, thin and cracked like dry leaves underfoot. To them she was harmless. To the overseer she was invisible. The overseer, Mr. Caleb Horn, stood near the tool shed, whip coiled at his side, eyes sharp as knives. He was a tall man with a narrow face and a permanent scowl, as if kindness physically hurt him. He barely glanced at Eliza as she passed. "Old Crow won't last the winter," he muttered to another man, not bothering to lower his voice. Eliza heard him. She heard everything, but she said nothing. She never said anything anymore. That was part of why she was allowed to move freely around the plantation. She wasn't assigned hard labor in the fields. Her body was too frail for that now. Instead, she was Sen. Tea on small errands, carrying water, cleaning corners no one cared about, watching children while their mothers worked. She moved between spaces unnoticed, like a shadow that had always been there. And shadows, Eliza knew, saw more than people realized. Later that morning she was sent to the big house. That alone was proof of how little she was feared. The big house smelled of polish and wealth and old money. Eliza's bare feet made almost no sound on the wide wooden floors as she shuffled down the hallway, carrying a bucket of fresh water. Her head was bowed, her shoulders hunched, her eyes lowered in practiced submission. But she saw everything. She saw the family portraits lining the walls, men in stiff suits, women in fine dresses, all staring proudly into the future they believed belonged to them forever. She saw the closed doors, the silver handles, the places where secrets were kept behind wood and lock. She knew which floorboard creaked near the study, Which stair groaned on the third step? Which door was often left unlocked because the master trusted his own sense of control more than any key? She had learned these things slowly, over decades. No one taught her. They simply forgot she was there. She reached the kitchen and set the bucket down. The cook barely acknowledged her, busy barking orders at two young girls who scrambled to obey. "Take that to the study next," the cook snapped, nodding toward the bucket. "Master wants water before breakfast." Eliza nodded again. The study. She picked up the bucket and made her way down the hall. As she approached the door, she heard voices inside, men's voices. The door was slightly ajar. Eliza slowed her steps. She did not mean to eavesdrop. She never meant to. It just happened. "Can't keep letting this go on," the master was saying. His voice was smooth, irritated. "The boy's been caught twice now." "The others are watching," Mr. Horn replied. "If we don't make an example, they'll get ideas." Eliza stopped just short of the doorway, her breath shallow. "The boy's barely 12, another man said, his tone hesitant. "That don't matter," the master snapped. "Disobedience spreads, you know that." There was a pause, then Horn spoke again, quieter now. "We'll do it tonight, after sundown, public. Let 'em see what happens." Eliza's fingers tightened around the handle of the bucket. The boy, she knew which one they meant. Samuel, a thin child with curious eyes who liked to ask questions when he thought no one was listening. A child who reminded her, in ways she tried not to think about, of someone she once loved more than her own life. Her chest tightened, sharp and sudden, like a blade twisting beneath her ribs. She stood there, unmoving, as the men continued to speak, casually discussing pain, punishment, fear, as if they were talking about the weather. Eliza's ears rang. The past rose up without permission. She was no longer in the hallway of the big house. She was younger, stronger, holding her daughter's hand as they were dragged apart. She smelled blood again, heard screams again, felt her knees give out as the world broke in two. Her breath hitched just once. She forced it down. When she finally stepped forward, making her presence known, the men turned in mild surprise. "Oh, it's just Eliza," the master said dismissively. "Put the water there." She obeyed, her movements shaky now, not from age, but from the storm raging beneath her skin. She turned to leave. As she did, her eyes lifted for just a moment, meeting the master's gaze. There was something there, something cold. But he didn't see it. No one ever did. By afternoon, the plantation buzzed with quiet tension. News traveled fast among the enslaved, even without words. People knew something bad was coming. Mothers held their children a little closer. Eyes avoided the overseer. Backs bent lower. Eliza sat outside her cabin, shelling peas into a small wooden bowl. A han. DS worked slowly, methodically. Around her, life went on as it always did, too busy surviving to stop. Samuel passed by with a bucket nearly as big as he was. He smiled when he saw her.
"Mama Eliza," he said softly, "you need help with that?"
She looked up at him, really looked at him. His face was smudged with dirt, his shirt torn at the shoulder. There was a small cut on his cheek, poorly healed, but his eyes were bright, still hopeful. For a moment her throat closed. "No, baby," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You go on." He nodded and started to leave. "Eliza," he paused, You think things ever change?" The question landed like a stone. She stared at the peas in her bowl. "Yes," she said finally, "they do." It was the truth, just not in the way he meant. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Eliza rose slowly and went inside her cabin. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her breath uneven. For years, decades, she had survived by shrinking, by becoming smaller, quieter, invisible. She had buried her anger deep, layered it under obedience and time, but some things did not stay buried forever. She crossed the small room and reached beneath a loose floorboard, one she knew no one else cared about. Her fingers brushed against something hard. She hesitated, then she pulled it free. A small worn object rested in her palm, a piece of bone carved with faint markings, old, meaningful, dangerous. Her last memory of her daughter. Eliza closed her eyes. Outside, a whip cracked. A child cried out. Mama Eliza straightened her back. For the first time in many years she stood tall. Tonight, she thought, something would begin, and no one would see it coming. Night came down on the plantation like a heavy hand. The sky darkened slowly, bruised purple and black. while cicadas began their endless song. Lanterns flickered to life near the big house, casting long, crooked shadows across the yard. Somewhere near the tool shed, voices rose, sharp, impatient. Orders were being given. Mama Eliza sat on the edge of her cot, the small carved bone resting in her open palm. She had not moved since she pulled it from beneath the floorboard. The sounds outside drifted in through the thin cabin walls, footsteps, murmurs, the clink of metal. Every noise tightened something inside her, winding her nerves like a rope pulled too far. She knew what was coming. She had always known. That knowledge was old, older than the plantation itself, older than the scars on her back. It lived inside her bones, as constant as breath. Eliza closed her fingers around the carved piece and pressed it to her chest. Her heartbeat thudded against it, slow but strong. People thought age weakened the heart. They were wrong. Age only taught it how to endure. She rose, joints protesting softly, and crossed the cabin. From a cracked clay bowl she drank a mouthful of water, not because she was thirsty, but because she needed the steadiness. Then she wrapped her shawl tighter around herself and stepped outside. The air was thick now, heavy with moisture and dread. Near the center of the plantation yard, a crowd had begun to form. Enslaved men and women were being herded together, pushed into place like livestock. Faces were drawn tight, eyes stayed low. Children clung to their mothers' skirts. Eliza moved slowly toward the edge of the gathering, careful not to draw attention. No one stopped her. No one ever did. At the center stood Samuel. His hands were bound, his feet bare in the dirt. A rope looped loosely around his shoulders, held by Mr. Horn. Lantern light painted the boy's face in harsh yellow shadows. His eyes darted, searching. They found Eliza, just for a second. Something passed between them. Fear. Confusion. A question he didn't dare speak. Eliza's face did not change. She knew better. The master stepped forward, clearing his throat as if preparing to mar. A speech at church. "This here is what happens," he said loudly, "when rules are broken." The whip cracked through the air, sharp as thunder. Eliza did not flinch. She had learned long ago that flinching did nothing to stop pain. The first strike landed. Samuel cried out, a sound too big for such a small body. With each lash, the pass crept closer. By the fifth strike, Eliza was no longer standing in the dirt yard. She was somewhere else. She was young again, not a girl. She had never really been allowed that, but strong, with straight shoulders and quick hands. Her hair was thick then, pulled back tight. Her name was still Eliza, but no one added Mama to it yet. Her husband, Isaiah, stood beside her. He was tall, taller than most, with a quiet strength that did not beg to be noticed. His hands were rough from work, but gentle when they touched her. When he smiled, it was small, meant only for her. Between them stood their daughter, Ruth. Ruth was everything. She had Eliza's eyes and Isaiah's stubborn chin. She laughed too loudly, asked too many questions, dreamed without permission. Eliza had tried to teach her to be careful, to stay quiet. But some spirits were born loud. The day they were separated began like any other. A trader arrived. Men with papers and sharp eyes walked through the rows, pointing, whispering. Eliza felt the change in the air before it happened. The way people went still. The way mothers tightened their arms. They called Isaiah's name first. Eliza reached for him, but a hand shoved her back. "No," the trader said. "Just him." Ruth screamed. Eliza screamed with her. Promises were made then, lies wrapped in calm voices. "He'll be back," the master had said, "just business." Eliza believed him. She had learned, too late, that belief was a luxury she could not afford. Isaiah never came back. Weeks later, Eliza learned he had been beaten to death on another plantation for refusing an overseer's order. They said he had lost his temper. She did not cry. She could not. Grief lodged in her chest like a stone. Then they took Ruth. Eliza fought that time. Scratched, kicked, bit. It earned her scars that still marked her body. Ruth was dragged away screaming her name. "Eliza! Mama!" That sound never left her. Years later, she learned Ruth had been sold again farther south. She died young, sick, alone, unnamed. No one ever told Eliza directly. She pieced it together from whispers, from silences, from the way hope slowly rotted inside her. The whip cracked again, snapping Eliza back into the present. Samuel collapsed to his knees. Someone sobbed in the crowd. A woman turned her face away. Eliza's jaw tightened. She felt it then, not just anger but clarity. This was not random cruelty. It was a system, a machine that ran on pain and silence and the belief that some lives did not count, and machines she knew could be broken. The punishment ended. Samuel was cut loose and dragged away, barely conscious. The crowd was dismissed with a wave of the overseer's hand. "Back to your cabins," he barked, "and remember what you saw." They did. Eliza returned to her cabin last. She closed the door and stood in the dark, listening to her own breathing. Her hands shook, not with fear but with something sharper, decision. She lowered herself to the floor and pried up the loose board again. Beneath it was more than the carved bone. There were scraps of paper, old, yellowed, brittle at the edges. She had gathered them over years, discarded notes, torn pages, things dropped and forgotten, names, dates, numbers, things no one thought an old slave woman could read. Eliza had learned her letters in secret long ago from a preacher who thought God would forgive him for teaching a slave woman how to read. She never forgot them. She spread the papers out on the floor. One name appeared again and again, Thomas Whitaker, the master. He owned this plantation now, but he had not always. Before him there had been others, partners, investors, men who shook hands and made deals over coffee while families were torn apart in the fields. Eliza traced the name with her finger. Whitaker had signed the papers that sent Isaiah away. Another man's name followed, Henry Cole. Cole had approved Ruth's sale. They were all connected. They always were. Eliza gathered the papers carefully and returned them to their hiding place. Then she sat back on her heels, staring at the dirt floor. Revenge, she knew, was a dangerous thing. She had avoided it for years, telling herself survival was enough, that living was resistance. But tonight, survival felt like surrender. Outside, the plantation settled into uneasy quiet. The night patrol passed, lanterns swinging. Eliza waited until the footsteps faded. Then she rose again. Moving slowly, she slipped out of her cabin and into the shadows. Her body knew these paths as well as it knew pain. She walked hunched, leaning on her cane, looking every bit the fragile old woman wandering without purpose. No one stopped her. She reached the big house from the rear, near the kitchen entrance. The door was unlocked. It always was. The idea of a slave stealing from the master was so unthinkable it barely required a lock. Inside, the house smelled of food and smoke and privilege. Eliza moved carefully, listening. She knew where she was going, the study. She waited until the hallway was empty, then shuffled inside. The room was lit by a single lamp. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with books the master had never read. A large desk sat near the window, papers neatly stacked. Eliza approached it. Her hands hovered for a moment, then she began to search. She did not rush. Panic led to mistakes. She had learned patience the hard way. She opened drawers slowly, scanning their contents. Letters, receipts, account books. Her breath caught when she found the ledger. It was thick, leather-bound, its pages filled with careful handwriting. Names, prices, dates, lives reduced to numbers. Eliza flipped through it, her eyes sharp despite her age. She found what she was looking for near the back, a torn page, partially removed. She carefully pulled it free. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. This was proof. Not justice. Justice did not exist here, but leverage. She folded the page and tucked it inside her shawl. As she turned to leave, a sound froze her in place. Footsteps. Eliza moved quickly now, her heart pounding. She slipped behind the heavy curtain near the window just as the door opened. The master stepped inside, muttering to himself. Eliza pressed her back against the wall, barely breathing. Whitaker poured himself a drink and sat at the desk, rubbing his temples. "Ungrateful animals," he muttered. "All of them." Eliza watched him through the thin gap in the curtain. She studied his face. This man had destroyed her family with a signature. He had never known her pain, never would. Whitaker finished his drink and left the room, slamming the door behind him. Eliza waited, counted her breaths. When she was sure the hallway was clear, she slipped out. The night swallowed her whole as she returned to her cabin. She did not sleep. She sat on her cot until dawn, the stolen page pressed flat beneath her hand. For the first time in decades, Eliza did not feel powerless. She felt dangerous. And the men who believed her broken, who believed her too old to matter, had no idea what they had allowed to walk freely among them. The past had not died. It had waited. And now it was awake. Dawn arrived quietly, as if afraid to disturb what had been set in motion. Mama Eliza sat where she had been all night, her back against the wall of her cabin, the thin grey light creeping in through the cracks between the boards. Her eyes burned from sleeplessness, but her mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years. The stolen ledger page lay folded inside her shawl, pressed flat against her chest. Warm from her body, outside, the plantation stirred back to life. Chains clinked, doors creaked open. Somewhere a man coughed hard and spat into the dirt. The smell of damp earth and old smoke drifted through the air. Eliza rose slowly, every joint aching, and stretched her fingers one by one. Pain was an old companion. It no longer commanded her attention. She tied her shawl, picked up her cane, and stepped outside like she had every other morning for decades. No one knew that something had changed. The overseer's eyes swept the yard as usual, searching for signs of laziness, defiance, weakness. They slid over Eliza without stopping. She shuffled past him, bent nearly double, mumbling to herself as though lost in confusion. Good, she thought. Let them keep believing that. Samuel did not appear in the yard that morning. Word travelled quietly. The boy had been locked in the storage shed, his wounds too fresh for work. Some said he might not survive. Others said it would be better if he didn't. Eliza heard every whisper. Each one fed the fire inside her. She was sent to the big house again before noon, tasked with carrying linens from the laundry room to the upper floor. It was a small mercy of age, lighter work, closer to the center of things. She took her time, moving carefully up the stairs, listening. From behind closed doors came laughter. The master's wife was entertaining a guest, another plantation owner by the sound of it. Their voices floated through the hallway, careless and bright. Terrible business with the boy, the guest said lightly. But discipline must be maintained. Of course, Mrs. Whitaker replied. Order is everything. Eliza passed by, her face blank. Order, she thought. Yes, that was what they called it. Later, when the house fell quiet and the sun climbed high, Eliza returned to her cabin. She waited until the patrol passed, then knelt and lifted the loose floorboard once more. She spread the papers out again. The ledger page was only one piece of the puzzle, but it was enough to begin. It showed transactions between Whitaker and two neighboring plantations. Names she recognized. Men who visited often, men who drank together and spoke of profit as if it were a god. Eliza knew something else, too. Men like Whitaker feared scandal more than death. That afternoon she set the first stone in motion. It happened quietly, a word here, a pause there. Eliza approached Martha, an older enslaved woman who worked in the kitchen and heard more than most. Martha trusted Eliza, everyone did. She had held babies, whispered prayers over the dying, listened without judgment. As Martha stirred a pot, Eliza leaned close and spoke softly, her voice trembling just enough to sound frail. "Child," she murmured, "you hear things in that house I don't hear no more." Martha glanced at her, curious but cautious. "Sometimes." Eliza sighed. "I had a bad dream about the master, about trouble coming." Martha frowned. "What kind of trouble?" Eliza shook her head slowly. "Don't rightly know, just men falling out with each other, fighting over papers, over money." Martha's stirring slowed. "Eliza," she said carefully, "you shouldn't say things like that." Eliza nodded. "I know. Old women get foolish thoughts." She shuffled away, leaving the words behind like seeds dropped into fertile soil. By evening the plantation hummed with unease. Two of the neighboring slaveholders arrived unexpectedly, their horses kicking up dust as they rode into the yard. Eliza watched from a distance as they dismounted, faces tight, voices low but sharp. Whitaker met them on the porch. Their conversation was brief and tense. One of the men gestured angrily toward the house. Whitaker's face darkened. They went inside together. That night the study light burned late. Eliza did not sleep. She waited. Just before midnight, raised voices shattered the quiet. A crash followed, something heavy striking wood. Eliza rose, heart pounding, and slipped outside her cabin. Others were emerging too, drawn by instinct and fear. The big house glowed with lantern light now, shadows jumping wildly against the walls. A scream cut through the air. Then silence, Moments later, the front door burst open. One of the visiting slaveholders stumbled out, pale and shaking. "He's fallen," the man shouted. "Fetch help!" People rushed forward. Lanterns were raised. Eliza joined them, moving slowly, her face a mask of concern. Inside the study, Whitaker lay crumpled at the base of the stairs leading to the upper floor. His neck was twisted at an unnatural angle, his eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Blood pooled beneath his head. Someone crossed themselves. Another man backed away, muttering. The overseer pushed through the crowd, his face tight with shock. He knelt beside Whitaker, fingers fumbling for a pulse. "He's dead," Orne said quietly. A gasp rippled through the room. The master dead. Eliza's breath caught, not in surprise, but in something dangerously close to satisfaction. She had not pushed him, she had not touched him at all, but she knew why he was dead. Whitaker had been drunk, enraged by accusations and fear. The stairs were steep, the railing loose. Eliza had noticed that weeks ago. All it took was one misstep, one shove of fate guided by whispered truths. The visiting slaveholders were questioned immediately. They swore it was an accident. An argument, yes, but nothing more. No one could prove otherwise. By dawn, the word spread, the master had fallen down the stairs. An accident. Eliza sat outside her cabin as the sun rose again, the same way it had the day before, but everything felt different now. The plantation was leaderless. Mrs. Whitaker locked herself in her room, weeping. The overseer barked orders louder than usual, his authority strained. Patrols doubled. The enslaved moved carefully, eyes wide. Fear had shifted. It no longer flowed in only one direction. 2 days later, the police arrived. They came on horseback, wearing dusty uniforms, faces set in grim lines. They questioned everyone, owners, overseers, servants. When they came to Eliza, she sat on a stool outside her cabin, staring vacantly at the ground. "Did you see anything unusual the night of the accident?" one officer asked. Eliza squinted up at him. "Accident? The master's death." "Oh," she said, nodding slowly. "Poor man, slipped, they say." "Yes, did you hear arguing?" She frowned, as if trying to remember. "I don't hear so good no more. Night noises all sound same." The officer studied her for a moment, then waved her off. "She's harmless," he said to his partner. "Doesn't even know what day it is." Eliza lowered her head, hiding a smile. That night she returned to the big house once more. No one stopped her. The place felt hollow now, stripped of its power. She moved through it like a ghost, heading straight for the study. The ledger was still there. She opened it again, careful not to disturb the pages. She tore out another sheet, one that detailed payments made to local patrols in exchange for flexibility. Insurance, Whitaker had called it. Eliza folded the page and tucked it away. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The first fall had been easy, too easy. She knew better than to believe it would stay that way. As she returned to her cabin, she passed the storage shed. A soft sound came from inside. She paused. "Samuel?" she whispered. There was a faint movement. She crouched, peering through a crack in the wall. The boy lay on the dirt floor, breathing shallowly, his back bandaged crudely. Eliza pressed her forehead to the wood. "Hold on," she murmured. "Just a little longer." She rose and moved away before anyone could see her there. Back in her cabin, she hid the second page beneath the floorboard and sat in the darkness. 2 men gone. Now. One dead, one ruined by suspicion and fear. And still no one looked at her. The old woman, the useless one, the harmless one. Eliza closed her eyes. This was only the beginning. The rain began before dawn, slow at first, then steady, drumming against the tin roofs of the cabins and turning the dirt paths into slick ribbons of mud. The plantation woke under a grey sky, heavy and watchful, as if the land itself sensed that something had gone wrong and might yet go worse. Mama Eliza stood in the doorway of her cabin, leaning on her cane, watching the rain soak into the earth. The air smelled clean, sharp with wet leaves and iron. Somewhere beyond the fields, thunder rolled again, distant but patient. The master was dead. The words still felt strange, unreal, even though she had watched his body carried out under a sheet the day before. Even though she had seen the way the overseer's hands shook as he barked orders now, his voice pitched too high, his authority stretched thin. Death changed things. It always had. By mid-morning the police returned, this time in greater number. 4 men rode in together, boots splashed with mud, coats darkened by rain. They dismounted near the big house and spoke briefly with the overseer before spreading out across the yard. This was no longer a courtesy visit. This was an investigation. Eliza felt it in the tightening of the air, in the way conversations died as the officers passed, in the way eyes followed them and then dropped quickly to the ground. She moved as she always did, slowly, carefully, never appearing to be in a hurry. She carried a basket of kindling toward the kitchen, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed. As she passed the patrol captain, a thick-necked man with a scar along his jaw, she stumbled deliberately, the basket tipping and spilling wood across the mud. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, dropping to her knees with difficulty. The captain scowled. "Watch where you're going, old woman." "Yes, sir. My eyes ain't what they used to be." He waved her away impatiently, continued on. Eliza gathered the kindling slowly, her hands trembling just enough to look convincing. She noted the way the captain spoke to his men, the way they deferred to him. She counted them, 4 now. Likely more would come if things grew complicated. She carried the basket into the kitchen and set it down. Inside, the mood was tense. Pots simmered unattended. The cook whispered angrily at a young girl who had nearly burned the bread. "They asking everybody questions," Martha murmured when Eliza came close. "Even the children." Eliza nodded. "Lord, do that." Martha hesitated. "You hear anything strange lately?" Eliza tilted her head as if confused. "Strange how?" Martha lowered her voice. "About the master. Folks saying maybe it weren't no accident." Eliza sighed, a long, tired sound. "People talk when they scared." "That's true," Martha said. "But still—" Eliza reached out and touched Martha's arm gently. "You don't worry your heart over it. Ain't nothing good come from that." Martha nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. Good, Eliza thought. Doubt spread just as well as fear. The officers worked through the day, questioning everyone they could. They focused mostly on the visiting slaveholders, men with money, tempers, and reason to argue. But by afternoon, they began to widen their net. An officer stopped Eliza near the water pump. "You," he said, pointing, "come here." Eliza shuffled forward, her steps uncertain. "What's your name?" "How long you been on this plantation?" She frowned, counting silently on her fingers. "Long time, longer than most." "Did you see or hear anything the night the master died?" She squinted at him. "I heard thunder." He frowned. "Anything else?" "Rain came later." The officer exhaled sharply. "Did you hear voices shouting?" Eliza shook her head slowly. "Nights all sound same to me. Crickets, frogs, old, bones creaking." The officer studied her face, searching for something. He found only age. "Where were you that night?" "In my bed," she said simply. "Where else I go at my age?" He turned away with a dismissive gesture. "She's no use," he said to another officer. "Barely knows what's happening." Eliza remained where she was for a moment after they left, her heart beating steadily. She had learned long ago that the truth, when wrapped in simplicity, often passed unnoticed. That evening, the captain called a meeting on the porch of the big house. The enslaved were ordered to stand in the yard while the officers addressed them. Rain dripped from the eaves, pattering softly as the captain spoke. "We will find out what happened here," he said loudly. "If anyone is hiding something, it will only make things worse for them." His gaze swept the crowd. Eliza stood near the back, leaning heavily on her cane. The captain continued. "The master's death has caused complications. Until matters are settled, this plantation will remain under watch." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Under watch meant patrols at night, restricted movement, punishment for the smallest infraction. Order, they called it. Eliza felt a flicker of irritation. She had expected this. Pressure always followed disruption, but pressure could be redirected. That night, she waited until the patrol made its first round. She listened to the rhythm of their boots, the way their lantern light passed across her cabin wall, then faded. She rose and moved quietly. The rain had stopped, leaving the world damp and gleaming. Clouds hid the moon, cloaking the plantation in darkness. Eliza moved along the familiar paths, her feet finding their way without sound. She did not go to the big house. Instead, she headed toward the far fence, where the land dipped and the trees grew thick. Beyond it lay the edge of the swamp and one of the neighboring plantations, Henry Cole's land. Cole had been one of Whitaker's partners. His name appeared often in the ledger. He had been present the night Whitaker died, his face pale with fear. Eliza reached the fence and slipped through a loose section she knew well. She crossed the muddy ground slowly, careful to leave no clear trail. Rain was good for that. It erased things. Near the edge of Cole's property stood a small storage shed. Eliza approached it cautiously. She knew from long observation that Cole kept his private papers there, away from the house. She waited, listening. Nothing. She moved closer and crouched near the door. From beneath her shawl she pulled the folded ledger page and another scrap of paper she had prepared earlier, a note written in careful, shaky script. She slid the note under the door, weighting it with a small stone. It read simply, "I know what you and Whitaker did. They will come for you next." Eliza did not wait to see the effect. She returned the way she came, slipping back onto her own plantation just as the patrol made its second round. She was back in her cabin before the lantern light reached her door. By morning the storm had passed, but something else had begun. Henry Cole arrived before noon, riding hard, his horse lathered with sweat. He went straight to the big house, demanding to see the patrol captain. Eliza watched from a distance, shelling peas in the shade. Cole's voice carried, sharp and frantic. "You have to understand," he said. "Whitaker had enemies, people who wanted him ruined." The captain listened, arms crossed. "I'm telling you," Cole insisted, "this wasn't just an accident. There's more going on here." The captain's eyes narrowed. "What kind of enemies?" Cole hesitated. Eliza smiled faintly. That afternoon the officers returned to the study. Papers were examined again, less like friendship and more like motive. Eliza moved through the cabins, offering comfort, listening. She heard fear, confusion, hope, dangerous things, all of them. Samuel remained alive, though weak. Eliza checked on him quietly when she could, bringing water, murmuring encouragement. The boy clung to her words like a lifeline. "Why are they so mad now?" he whispered once. Eliza stroked his hair gently. "When people lose what they think they own, they get angry. Is it going to get worse?" She paused. "Before it gets better?" "Yes." He nodded, trusting her completely. That night the officers made an arrest, not among the enslaved. Henry Cole was taken into custody, accused of withholding information, of financial irregularities, of having motive and opportunity. The plantation buzzed with shock. Eliza sat outside her cabin as Cole was led away, his face twisted with disbelief and terror. He looked around as if expecting someone to save him. No one did. The patrol captain addressed the overseer privately afterward. Eliza could not hear the words, but she saw the gestures, the frustration, the uncertainty. They were chasing shadows now. Good. The next days passed in uneasy tension. The officers remained, combing through records, questioning neighbors, following false trails Eliza carefully laid. A misplaced comment here, a half-remembered rumor there. She let them see what they expected to see: greedy men, bad blood, drunken arguments. They never once looked down at the bent old woman passing them in the yard. On the fourth night, Eliza returned to the big house once more. She moved through the darkened halls like a memory, her cane barely touching the floor. In the study, she opened the ledger again. This time she did not tear out a page. She made a mark, a small symbol, carved lightly into the wood of the desk itself, barely visible unless one knew where to look. A reminder. She left the house and stood for a moment on the porch, breathing in the night air. The plantation lay quiet beneath her, tense but alive. The law was here, and still she walked freely. Eliza returned to her cabin and lay down at last, exhaustion settling into her bones. But beneath it, something else pulsed, steady, relentless, control. She had outsmarted the law once, she would do it again, and next time she would not wait for accidents. The plantation did not breathe the same after Henry Cole was taken away. It held its breath. Days passed under a strained quiet, as if every tree, every cabin, every stretch of cotton waited for something else to fall. The patrol remained, their horses tied near the big house, their boots leaving deep prints in the damp ground. Lanterns burned later at night. Doors that had once stood open were now kept shut. Fear had shifted its shape. Before, it had flowed downward, whip to back, order to obedience, power to silence. Now it twisted sideways, turning slaveholder against slaveholder, authority against itself. Mama Eliza felt it in the air each morning when she stepped out of her cabin. She tasted it when she breathed. It sharpened her senses and steadied her hands. She moved through the days as she always had, her pace slow, her eyes dull, her voice barely louder than a whisper. But beneath that skin of age and weakness, her mind worked constantly, measuring, remembering, choosing. The law was present. That made every move more dangerous. It also made every move more effective. On the third day after Cole's arrest, the patrol captain summoned the overseer to the porch. Eliza happened to be nearby, seated on a low stool, mending a torn sack. Her needle moved slowly, clumsy on purpose. "You're telling me you didn't know about these payments?" the captain demanded, holding a folded paper. The overseer wiped sweat from his brow. "Sir, Mr. Whitaker handled all the accounts himself." The captain snorted. "Convenient." Eliza did not look up. The captain continued, his voice edged wry. Irritation. "We've got records of money changing hands, missing entries, bribes to patrols in other counties. This plantation's a mess." The overseer swallowed. "What does that mean for us?" "It means," the captain said flatly, "that until we know who's dirty and who isn't, nobody's clean." Eliza pushed her needle through the cloth and tied off the thread with trembling fingers. "Nobody's clean," she thought. "That's the truest thing you've said." That afternoon, a wagon arrived from town carrying supplies and gossip. The driver talked freely as he unloaded sacks of flour and salt, glancing around to make sure no officers were close. "They saying Cole might hang," he whispered to a field hand. "They saying Whitaker weren't the first to fall neither." The words traveled fast. By sunset, the plantation buzzed with rumors. Some said there were secret accounts hidden somewhere on the land. Others whispered that Whitaker had planned to sell half the enslaved before the harvest and had partners who didn't want that getting out. Fear sharpened greed, greed sharpened betrayal. Eliza listened from the shadows, filing away every word. That night she made her next move. She waited until the patrol had passed twice, until the rhythm of their rounds settled into predictability. Then she rose and slipped out of her cabin, cane in hand, her shawl pulled tight. She did not head toward the big house. She went toward the livestock pens. The horses shifted as she passed, snorting softly. Eliza moved calmly among them, murmuring nonsense sounds that soothed them. Animals trusted her. They always had. She reached the feed shed and paused, listening. Nothing. Inside, the smell of grain and hay was thick. She knelt slowly, joints protesting, and reached into a sack near the back. Her fingers closed around a small cloth bundle she had hidden there days earlier. She carried it to the trough of one of the prized horses, an animal owned by a neighboring slaveholder who had arrived earlier that evening for a tense meeting with the patrol. Eliza unwrapped the cloth just enough to sprinkle a fine powder into the feed. It was not poison. Not exactly. It would make the horse sick. Weak. Unpredictable. Accidents, Eliza knew, were easier to believe than murder. She finished, rewrapped the bundle, and returned it to its place. Then she shuffled back toward her cabin, becoming old and slow again before anyone could see her. The next morning the horse collapsed. The owner shouted. The overseer ran. The patrol was summoned. "It just dropped," a stable boy said, wide-eyed, like its legs gave out. The patrol captain examined the animal briefly. "Could be bad feed or sickness." The owner's face reddened. "That horse was worth more than this whole damned field." The captain glanced toward the feed shed. Eliza stood at a distance, leaning on her cane, her face creased with concern. "Shame," she murmured to no one in particular. The owner stormed toward the overseer. "You've got rot on this land," he snapped. "First Whitaker, now this. I want my accounts checked. I want to know where my money's been going." The overseer bristled. "You accusing me?" "I'm accusing everyone," the man shot back. The patrol captain stepped between them, his patience thinning. That afternoon another argument broke out, this time between two visiting slaveholders disputing a shipment that had gone missing months earlier. Records were demanded. Names were thrown around. Eliza watched it all unfold like a slow-burning fire. She did not need to push hard. They were doing it to themselves now. But there was still one man who stood apart from the chaos. Caleb Horn, the overseer. He moved through the plantation with a different kind of tension now, his eyes sharper, his temper shorter. He had ruled with cruelty for years, but now cruelty was not enough to steady him. Eliza noticed how his gaze lingered on the enslaved longer than before, searching. She noticed how often his eyes passed over her and then returned, just briefly, as if some small instinct whispered that something was wrong, that would not do. She needed his focus elsewhere. That evening, she approached Horn near the tool shed. She moved slowly, carefully, her shoulders rounded, her voice thin. "Mr. Horn," she said softly. He turned, surprised. "What is it, old woman?" She wrung her hands. I don't mean no trouble, just thought you ought to know." He narrowed his eyes. "Know what?" She hesitated, looking around as if afraid. "I heard talk in the cabins. Folks saying maybe the law ain't done yet, saying they might start looking at overseers too." Horn's jaw tightened. "Who said that?" Eliza shook her head. "I don't remember names so good, just whispers." He stared at her for a long moment. "You hear anything else?" She swallowed. "Some folks think Mr. Cole talked, gave names." Horn's face went pale, then flushed. "Get back to your cabin," he snapped, "and keep your mouth shut." "Yes, sir," she said, already turning away. She felt his eyes on her back long after she left. That night Horn drank heavily. Eliza knew because she heard him shouting near the big house, his voice slurred, his words tumbling over one another. He argued with one of the patrolmen, accused him of betrayal, demanded assurances. Men like Horn, Eliza knew, were most dangerous when they felt cornered. They lashed out, they made mistakes. The next day, Horn ordered a surprise inspection of the cabins. He stormed through them with 2 armed men, tossing belongings aside, searching for anything that could be called suspicious. When he reached Eliza's cabin, she sat on her cot, hands folded, eyes unfocused. "What you got under that floor?" Horn demanded suddenly. Eliza blinked. "Under the floor?" He stepped forward and kicked at the loose board hard. It did not move. Eliza had fixed it the night before. "There ain't nothing there," she said quietly. Horn stared at her, breathing hard. Then he turned away with a curse. That was too close. Eliza spent that afternoon in stillness, her thoughts slow and careful. She had tightened the web too fast around Horn. He was feeling it now. She needed to redirect him, give him a target that wasn't her. By evening she had one. She found Martha in the kitchen, her face drawn. "They took Jacob," Martha whispered. "The patrol say he was stealing tools." Eliza's eyes narrowed. Jacob was young, angry, prone to speaking his mind, useful. "That's a shame," Eliza said softly. "Boy always did talk too much." Martha looked at her sharply. "What you mean?" Eliza leaned closer, lowering her voice. "He been saying things about Mr. Horn, about how he seen him take money that weren't his." Martha's mouth fell open. "That ain't—" "I know," Eliza murmured, "but talk don't need to be true to be dangerous." Martha swallowed hard. That night Horn heard the rumor. It came to him twisted and sharpened, as rumors always did. By midnight he was convinced Jacob had betrayed him to the law. He confronted the boy violently. The screams carried across the plantation. Eliza lay on her cot, eyes open, listening. By morning Jacob was gone. They said he had tried to run. They said the dogs found him near the swamp. They said many things. The patrol accepted the story easily. But something had shifted. Horn's violence did not restore his control. It exposed his fear. The enslaved watched him differently now. So did the patrol. Eliza felt the weight of it when she passed the officers that day, their glances lingering on Horn, their murmured conversations stopping when he approached. The web was tightening, but there was still one loose thread. Samuel. The boy had recovered enough to sit up now, though his back was a lattice of scars. Eliza visited him when she could, bringing bits of food, water, quiet words. "You see what's happening?" he whispered one eve. She nodded. "I see." "They scared," he said. "The white men." "Yes," Eliza agreed. "They are." Samuel hesitated. "Is that good?" Eliza considered the question carefully. "It is useful." That night a fire broke out near the cotton storehouse. It was small at first, quickly contained, but the damage was enough to cause panic. Someone had set it deliberately. The patrol went on high alert. Accusations flew. One slaveholder accused another of sabotage. Another swore it was the work of the enslaved. Horn barked orders until his voice cracked. Eliza watched the flames die, her face lit orange in the dark. She had not started the fire, but she knew who had. Fear, once unleashed, did not need guidance. It spread on its own. By dawn, the plantation was on the edge of collapse. Records were missing. Trust was gone. The patrol spoke openly of bringing in more men. Eliza returned to her cabin and sat heavily on her cot, exhaustion pressing down on her bones. She had pushed farther than she ever had before, and now the law was no longer just nearby. It was circling. She closed her eyes and breathed slowly. The web was tight. The next move would have to be precise, because once the hunter realizes he is trapped, he becomes desperate. And desperation, Eliza knew, was the most dangerous thing of all. The plantation crossed a line after the fire. It was not spoken aloud, but everyone felt it, the quiet understanding that whatever fragile balance had existed before was gone. Smoke still lingered in the air days later, clinging to clothes and hair, seeping into the wood of the cabins and the walls of the big house. Even after the ashes were cleared, the smell remained, sharp and accusing. Fear had stopped whispering. Now it spoke openly. The patrol doubled its presence. Lanterns burned all night. Dogs were brought in from town, lean animals with sharp noses and sharper handlers. Their baying echoed across the fields after dark, raising the hair on the backs of necks and setting children crying in their sleep. Mama Elisa listened to it all from her cot, eyes open, breath slow. She had expected this. Systems never collapsed quietly. They thrashed first. Caleb Horn no longer slept. Eliza could see it in the way he moved, jerky, impatient, his eyes sunken and rimmed with red. He prowled the plantation like a wounded animal, snapping at anyone who crossed his path. His whip cracked more often now, not always with purpose, sometimes simply to hear the sound. Violence was his language, and lately he was speaking it fluently. 2 mornings after the fire, Horn dragged a man from the fields for questioning. The accusation was vague, suspicious behavior, loitering near the storehouse, but the punishment was real. The man returned hours later, barely able to walk, blood soaking through his shirt. The enslaved watched in silence. Eliza watched too. She did not intervene, not yet. That afternoon, the patrol captain confronted Horn near the stables. Their voices carried across the yard, tense and sharp. "You're losing control," the captain said. Horn bristled. "This is my plantation." "It's under investigation," the captain snapped, "and your methods are making things worse." Horn laughed bitterly. "Worse for who? You?" The captain stepped closer. "For you. You think I don't see what you're doing, beating men half to death without evidence?" "They're slaves," Horn shot back. "They lie." The captain's jaw tightened. "Everyone lies when they're scared. That includes overseers." The words landed like a blow. Horn's hand twitched toward his whip. Eliza, passing nearby with a bucket of water, stumbled deliberately, spilling it across the dirt between them. She gasped softly, dropping to her knees. "Oh, oh my," she murmured. "I'm sorry, sirs." The interruption broke the moment. The captain stepped back, disgusted, and waved her away. "Get out of the way." "Yes, sir," Eliza said, struggling. She to her feet. As she shuffled away, she heard the captain say quietly, "Watch yourself, Horn. You're not untouchable." That night, Horn drank again. Eliza knew because she heard him arguing with no one at all near the edge of the yard, his words slurred and circular, his anger turning inward. "They think it's me," he muttered. "Think I don't know." She lay still, listening, her mind already moving ahead. By morning, Horn had decided he would find the culprit, and he would do it alone. The patrol captain was wary now, watching him too closely, so Horn turned to his own methods, the ones he trusted: intimidation, isolation, and the belief that fear always forced truth to the surface. He began interrogating the enslaved at night, away from witnesses, dragging men and women from their cabins one by one. The dogs were brought close, their growls low and constant. Eliza waited. She knew her turn would come. It did not take long. On the 4th night after the fire, Horn appeared at her cabin door. His shadow filled the narrow doorway, lantern light flickering across his face. "Get up," he said. Eliza stirred slowly, blinking as if confused. "Is it morning already?" Horn grabbed her arm and yanked her to her feet. Pain shot through her shoulder, sharp and hot. She gasped but did not cry out. "Don't play with me," he snarled. "You've been here a long time." "Yes, sir," she whispered. "Long time." "You hear things," he said. "You see things." "Not so good anymore," she replied, her voice trembling. "Eyes bad, ears bad." Horn dragged her outside, ignoring her protests. The night air was cool, the moon hidden behind clouds. 2 dogs strained at their leashes nearby, hackles raised. He shoved her onto a stool near the tool shed. "Who's doing this?" he demanded. "Who started the fire?" Eliza shook her head slowly. "I don't know." Horn slapped her. The blow rang through her skull, bright and disorienting. She tasted blood. "I said who?" he growled. Eliza lifted her shaking hands. "Please, sir, I'm just an old woman." Horn leaned close, his breath sour. "Old women lie too." He circled her, pacing. "You've been here longer than anyone. You've seen masters come and go. You know the secrets of this place." Eliza lowered her head, letting her shoulders slump further. I only know how to survive. Horn stopped in front of her. For a moment something like doubt flickered in his eyes, then anger swallowed it. Take her to the swamp, he said suddenly to the dog handlers. Let's see how much she remembers out there. The word sent a ripple through the nearby watchers. Even the handlers hesitated. She's old, one said. She won't last. Horn smiled thinly. Then she won't lie. Eliza's heart beat faster now, not with fear but calculation. This was dangerous, but danger she knew could be used. They dragged her forward, the dogs pulling hard at their leads. Eliza stumbled deliberately, her body sagging, forcing them to slow. The path into the swamp was narrow and slick, roots twisting like traps beneath the mud. The night grew darker as the trees closed in. The sounds changed too. Crickets gave way to frogs, the air thick with rot and water. Horn followed close behind, lantern held high. Start talking, he said. Who's helping you? Eliza coughed, spitting blood into the mud. Helping me do what? Horn cursed and shoved her again. She fell this time, landing hard on her side. Pain exploded through her hip. She groaned, clutching her body. The handlers hesitated again. She's hurt, one said. Get her up, Horn snapped. We're almost there. Eliza lay still for a moment longer than necessary, letting her breathing grow shallow. The dogs whined, confused. Then she spoke softly. I heard something, she murmured. Horn leaned closer. What? A man, she said. White man, talking near the river, talking about papers, about selling folks before the law comes back. Horn froze. Who? He demanded. Eliza lifted her head just enough to look at him. I didn't see his face, but I heard his voice, sounded like yours, or maybe Mr. Cole's. Horn recoiled as if struck. That's a lie, he hissed. Eliza shook her head weakly. Old ears mix things up. Horn turned away, pacing, his lantern swinging wildly. His mind was racing now. Eliza could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his free hand twitched. Suspicion had finally turned inward. She had him. They reached the edge of the swamp, where the ground dipped sharply toward dark water. The air was heavy, buzzing with insects. Horn stopped. Get out, he told the handlers. I'll finish this. They hesitated. That's an order, he barked. Reluctantly, they backed away, the dogs pulling with them until their sounds faded into the trees. Eliza and Horn stood alone. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Horn laughed, harsh and broken. You think you're clever, old woman? Eliza said nothing. You think you can turn this on me? She looked up at him slowly. Ain't nobody turning nothing, she said. Things turn on their own when they're rotten. Horn's face twisted with rage. He raised his whip. Eliza moved, not fast but precise. As Horn swung, she leaned forward instead of back, letting the whip pass over her shoulder. At the same moment, she reached out with her cane and hooked it behind his knee. He was not expecting resistance. He stumbled. The ground beneath his feet was slick with mud and moss. He flailed, arms windmilling, lantern flying from his grasp and shattering against a tree. Darkness swallowed them. Horn shouted as he fell backward down the slope, crashing through brush and roots. There was a heavy splash, followed by silence. Eliza stood still, her chest heaving, her ears straining. Then she heard it, gasping, thrashing, the sound of a man fighting water. Eliza limped forward carefully, peering down toward the river's edge. The moon broke through the clouds just enough to reveal movement. Horn's head bobbing, his hands clawing at the mud, his boots dragging him down. He reached out toward her. Eliza, he gasped. Help me. She stood there, her cane planted firmly in the ground. She thought of Isaiah, of Ruth, of Samuel's screams, of Jacob's body left in the swamp. I've been helping you all my life, she said quietly. Horn slipped beneath the surface, once, twice, then he was gone. Eliza did not move until the water stilled. She listened. Only the swamp answered. She turned away slowly, her body aching, her mind strangely calm. By the time the handlers returned with the dogs, there was nothing to find. They searched through the night, lanterns sweeping the water, dogs whining in confusion. The patrol was summoned. The captain arrived, his face grim. They found Horn's whip, his lantern, no body. He must have fallen, the captain said finally. Drunk, angry, slipped. Accidents, Eliza knew, were always easier to believe. By morning the news spread. The overseer was gone. The plantation stood without a master and without an overseer. The law had lost its grip. Eliza sat outside her cabin. As the sun rose, her face pale, her body sore, her shawl stained with mud and blood. No one questioned her. They pitied her. She barely survived, someone whispered. Poor old thing. Eliza closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The hunter was gone, and now the land itself was watching. The rain did not stop. It fell for 3 days straight, soaking the earth until the plantation grounds turned to thick, sucking mud. Wagons groaned as they crossed the yard. Horses snorted and stamped, uneasy. The river beyond the trees swelled and crept closer to its banks, carrying with it broken branches, dead leaves, and the faint promise of danger. Mama Eliza welcomed the rain. It softened footprints, it blurred tracks, and it made men impatient. Inside her cabin, the air smelled of damp wood and old herbs. Eliza sat near the hearth, her shawl pulled tight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Beneath the loose floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the last and most dangerous set of papers, the ones taken from the travelling magistrate's satchel in Part 6, the ones that named names too powerful to be spoken aloud. She had not looked at them again, not yet. Knowledge, she knew, was like fire, useful only when controlled. Outside, boots sloshed through the mud, voices approached. Eliza's eyes opened. A sharp knock rattled the doorframe. "Eliza," a man called, "open up." She rose slowly, leaning on her cane, and unlatched the door. Deputy Collins stood there, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Behind him were 2 men she did not recognize, one wearing the coat of a state investigator, the other the dull grey uniform of the patrol. "Morning," Eliza said softly, squinting as if confused by the sight of them. Collins forced a polite smile. "We need to ask you a few more questions." Eliza nodded. "Course you do." They stepped inside, their presence filling the small space. The investigator looked around with faint distaste, his eyes lingering on the bare walls, the patched blanket, the simple table. "You've been questioned before," he said, "but new information has come to light." Eliza tilted her head. "That's so?" "Yes," he replied. "It seems you were seen near the big house on the night Magistrate Fowler disappeared." The air felt heavier. Eliza did not react immediately. She stared at him, blinking slowly, as if turning his words over in her mind. "Big house?" she echoed. "I clean there sometimes." "At night?" She frowned. "Old bones don't sleep good. Sometimes I walk." The investigator exchanged a glance with Collins. "Where did you walk?" the man pressed. Eliza gestured vaguely. "Wherever my feet take me." A pause stretched between them. The patrolman shifted his weight, his hand resting near his baton. The investigator sighed. "Mrs. Eliza, do you understand the seriousness of this situation?" Eliza's shoulders slumped. "I understand folks don't like trouble. Do you know what happens to people who interfere with the law?" Her eyes lifted then. Just slightly, and for a brief moment, something sharp glinted there. "I know what happens to people when the law interferes with them," she said quietly. The investigator stiffened. Collins cleared his throat. "That'll be all for now." The men left soon after, their questions unanswered, their certainty shaken. As the door closed behind them, Eliza exhaled slowly. They were circling now. Good. Fear made men careless. That afternoon, chaos rippled through the plantation. Word arrived that the river patrol had found something tangled in the reeds downstream, a body. By the time the news reached Eliza, the entire yard buzzed with whispers. Overseers barked orders, sending people back to work, but no one listened. The name spread from mouth to mouth like poison. Magistrate Fowler. They brought him up near sunset. Eliza watched from the edge of the crowd, her face carefully composed. The body was bloated, waterlogged, the skin pale and split in places. His fine coat was torn, pockets turned inside out. The investigator knelt beside the corpse, his jaw clenched. "No signs of robbery," he muttered. "No struggle marks." Someone crossed themselves. Another spat into the mud. Eliza noted every detail. The body had been placed in the river, not thrown. The wounds, small, precise, were not from a knife or a club. They were from panic, from being held under just long enough, not long enough to bruise. Exactly as she had planned, Mrs. Whitaker collapsed when she heard the news, sobbing hysterically. The overseer ordered the quarters locked down that night. Patrols doubled again. Lanterns moved constantly through the darkness, their glow sliding across cabin walls like searching eyes. Eliza lay awake, listening. Footsteps passed her door twice. See, on the 3rd pass, they stopped. A hand tested the latch. "Eliza," a voice whispered, "open up." It was Martha. Eliza rose and opened the door just enough to let her friend slip inside. Martha's face was pale, her eyes wild. "They say the old magistrate's dead. They say someone helped him die." Eliza nodded slowly. "People say many things." "They're scared," Martha whispered. "They're talking about examples. about hanging someone to quiet the rest. Eliza took Martha's hands in her own. Fear makes people crueler than usual, but fear also makes them blind. Martha searched her face. You know something? Eliza squeezed her hands once gently. I know you should go back before someone notices you gone. Reluctantly, Martha nodded and slipped back into the rain. Eliza closed the door and leaned against it. The time was coming. 2 days later, the investigators summoned the plantation owners from 3 surrounding counties to the courthouse in Jackson. Eliza knew because she heard it whispered by the driver sent to fetch them. That night, she lifted the floorboard and took out the oilcloth bundle. She unwrapped the papers carefully. Names leapt out at her. Judges, sheriffs, investors, men who built their power on silence, men who believed themselves untouchable. Eliza smiled thinly. Before dawn, she hid the papers in 3 separate places, one beneath the roots of the old oak near the river, one inside the hollow beam of the abandoned smokehouse, and one sewn into the lining of her shawl. Redundancy, she thought. Always redundancy. The next morning she did something unexpected. She went to the church, the white church. It stood at the edge of town, its paint peeling, its bell cracked but still usable. Eliza had not been allowed inside for years, but no one stopped her now. She shuffled up the steps during morning prayers and sat quietly in the back pew. The preacher noticed her and hesitated, then continued. After the service, as people filed out, Eliza remained seated. When the preacher approached, uncertain, she looked up at him. Reverend, she said softly, I need confession. He frowned. I'm not sure this is appropriate. Eliza leaned closer. I carry heavy sins. Something in her voice made him swallow. They spoke quietly. Eliza did not confess to murder. She confessed to knowledge, to secrets too heavy for one soul. She told him just enough, names without details, hints without proof. She let him feel the weight without understanding its shape. By the time she finished, the preacher's hands trembled. You must go to the authorities, he whispered. Eliza nodded. I plan to. She left him standing there, shaken. The courthouse meeting erupted before noon. Arguments spilled into the street. Accusations flew. Old alliances cracked under pressure. By evening, warrants were issued, not for Eliza, for men who had never imagined they could be named. The investigator returned to the plantation that night, his face pale, his confidence gone. He went straight to Eliza's cabin. She was waiting. You knew, he said hoarsely. Eliza looked up at him, her expression gentle. Knew what? He stared at her for a long moment. Then quietly, You're not who you pretend to be. She smiled sadly. Neither are you. He left without another word. That night Eliza sat by the hearth and listened to the rain fade. The net had tightened, and she was standing safely outside it. As dawn broke on the 7th day, a horn sounded from the road. A wagon approached, carrying men in unfamiliar uniforms, state men. Eliza rose slowly and stepped outside. For the first time in her life she did not bow her head. The end was close now, not for her, for them. The wagon stopped at the edge of the plantation yard just as the sun cleared the trees. Its wheels were caked with dried mud, the iron rims rusted from long travel. 6 men climbed down, state men as Eliza had guessed, wearing uniform. That did not belong to this place. Their coats were cut differently, their boots newer, their eyes less accustomed to being obeyed without question. The overseer approached them, his confidence brittle, his voice too loud. Eliza stood near her cabin, leaning on her cane, watching. She had waited decades for this morning. The leader of the state men, a tall figure with grey at his temples, ignored the overseer entirely and scanned the yard. His gaze passed over the enslaved workers gathered at a distance, over the cabins, over the big house with its sagging porch and shuttered windows. Then his eyes settled on Eliza. He walked toward her. Every step felt loud. You, he said, stopping a few feet away. You're Eliza. She inclined her head slightly. That's what they call me. His mouth tightened. We need to speak. So do many people, she replied calmly. A murmur rippled through the yard. The overseer bristled. Sir, she's just an old. I didn't ask you, the man said sharply, never taking his eyes off Eliza. He gestured toward the road. Walk with me. Eliza nodded once and followed, her pace slow but steady. They stopped beneath the old oak near the river, the one whose roots twisted like grasping hands. Eliza felt the presence of the hidden papers beneath the soil, felt their weight like a second heart beating beneath the ground. "You've been at the center of every incident we've investigated," the state man said quietly. "Deaths, disappearances, collapsing alliances." Eliza looked out at the river. "Rivers carry many things." He studied her face. "You're sharper than you pretend. So are knives kept in sleeves," she said. A long silence passed. "We could arrest you," he said finally, "hold you until the truth shakes loose." Eliza turned to him then, meeting his gaze fully. "And what truth would that be?" she asked. "That I was beaten, bred, sold, buried alive by this place. That men who called themselves lawful fed bodies to the river and called it order." His jaw clenched. "You think you're untouchable," he said. "No," Eliza replied softly. "I think you are." She reached into her shawl. The state man stiffened, his hand dropping toward his sidearm, but Eliza only withdrew a folded piece of paper. She held it out between two fingers. She said. He took it reluctantly. As his eyes moved across the page, color drained from his face. "This document alone," Eliza continued, "names 5 men currently seated in your courthouse. There are others. Copies, hidden where fire and water cannot reach." "Where did you get this?" he demanded. She smiled faintly. "From men who believed an old woman was invisible." The wind stirred the oak leaves above them. "You could destroy them," he said slowly. "They already destroyed themselves," Eliza replied. "I only made sure the truth tripped over their own lies." He folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "What do you want?" he asked. Eliza considered the question. "I want this place to break," she said. "Not just here, everywhere it looks like this. I want no more boys locked in sheds until their backs bleed open. I want no more old women used up and forgotten. I want the world to choke on what it pretends not to see." "That's not a simple request," he said. "I am not a simple woman." They stood there as the river whispered past. At last he nodded. "We will proceed." Eliza bowed her head, not in submission but in acknowledgement. The arrests began before noon. They started in Jackson. Judges removed from benches, clerks dragged from offices. A sheriff shot himself in the leg while resisting and was carried out screaming. By evening, the names whispered by enslaved mouths for years were being shouted in the streets. The plantation dissolved into chaos. Mrs. Whitaker fled before dawn, leaving behind trunks of silver and letters that sealed her fate. The overseer was arrested while trying to burn records behind the barn. Neighbor. Slaveholders barricaded themselves in their homes, only to be pulled out by men they once paid to look away. Eliza watched it all from her cabin doorway. She felt no joy, only completion. Martha found her that night breathless, eyes shining with terror and hope. "They're saying everything's changing," she whispered. "They're saying the state's taking over. They're saying—" Eliza took her hands. "Slow down. They're saying slavery might end," Martha said, barely able to form the words. Eliza closed her eyes. "Not today," she said gently, "but soon." Martha stared at her. "You knew." Eliza opened her eyes again. "I hoped." That night the cabins were not locked. No patrols walked the lanes. Men sat awake, unsure whether to sleep or run or pray. Eliza lay on her pallet, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of a world shifting under its own weight. 3 days later the state man returned. This time he did not stand above her. He sat on the stool she offered him, his posture respectful. "The papers are authentic," he said. "Every one of them." Eliza nodded. "You've done something unprecedented," he continued. "You've turned the machinery of corruption against itself." Eliza smiled faintly. "Machines break when fed the wrong fuel. There will be trials," he said. "Long ones, painful ones." "Pain is nothing new," she replied. He hesitated. "You could leave." Eliza looked at him. "Where would I go?" "North," he said. "You could be free." She considered it. Then she shook her head. "Freedom is not a direction. It's a condition." She stood slowly, joints protesting, and walked to the doorway. "Take the papers from the oak," she said, "and from the smokehouse. Leave the rest." "What rest?" She touched her shawl. "Insurance." He nodded once. As he left, she felt something settle inside her, a tension she had carried so long it had shaped her bones. Samuel survived, barely. Eliza sat with him as he healed, feeding him broth, whispering stories of a world where his name was his own. He listened with wide eyes, the scars on his back like a map of a country he would never return to. "You're the reason," he told her one night. Eliza shook her head. "I am the witness." Word spread beyond Mississippi. People spoke of a collapse, of a reckoning, of an old woman who had undone a system by refusing to be afraid. They never used her name correctly. They never understood how patient she had been. One evening, as autumn edged the heat away, Eliza walked alone to the river. The water moved slower now, heavy with reflection. She removed her shawl and unfolded the last hidden paper. It listed names not yet fallen, men still powerful, men still safe. She held it over the water. For a moment, she thought of feeding it to the current, of letting the river decide. Then she folded it again and tucked it back into her shawl. "Not today," she murmured. Behind her, footsteps approached. Martha joined her, silent. "They're building a school," Martha said, "for the children." Eliza nodded. "Good, they say you should be honored." Eliza smiled, tired but content. "They say many things." The sun dipped low, turning the river to blood-colored light. Eliza stood straight, her back no longer bowed by habit. She had destroyed slaveholders, she had fooled the police, but more than that. She had made the world look at what it tried to ignore, and that, she knew, was vengeance enough.